So, Brad, the Instagram algorithm has completely figured me out, and it now is now showing me van life videos and photos and reels all the time. You could take this, Mercedes Sprinter and make it into a 2-bed, 3-bed sleeper, and it's got a kitchenette, a little bathroom, and hey, Dave, you could take this Dodge, gut it, and put in insulation and wood and cabinetry. You could make a van life out of this. And Brad, God damn it, I will watch all of them. I will watch a van life video all the time. And my wife and I talk about it all the time about how we don't want to buy one, and I certainly don't want to fix one up, even though that'd be fun as heck. But we want to rent one and go on a van life trip of just driving around national parks, whatever it is. But here's my critique about van life videos, specifically social media van life videos. So imagine it, you're living out of a Dodge or a Ford van. It's been converted, it's lovely inside, but they always show you the same shot, Brad. They always show you the same shot. It's always someone waving you in, and then the camera swoops in, and they're serving themselves a little espresso, and the back doors to the van are open, and out the back doors you see a beach at Malibu. It's always a cliff, or it's oh, look at this, it's the Grand Tetons. Oh, look at this, it's the Yellowstone River, right? So the van life videos always show you that. Here's the part they never show you. They never show you taking a crap in your kitchen. They don't show you that part, Brad.
No. Somehow that part never gets to it.
They don't show you it's raining outside and you're taking a shower with a hose that you have hooked up to your van. They never show you that part.
Yeah.
It's always here's another espresso by Malibu. It's just constant espressos in a morning light in the golden hour, by a beach or a cliff. They never show you the other part about showering in the back of a Circle K while your laundry's being done.
There's so much fascination here. Not only and having spent a lot of time in a Chevy Astro van growing up, I have a very warped sense of what's going on here, because I could not stand up in the back of that. These must be special vans where you can stand up in them. But aside from that, your algorithm on Instagram is vastly different than my algorithm. I have a very different algorithm than you've got. I don't know what's going on over there. I am not getting people drinking espresso in vans. Let's put it that way.
Well, I will say this. It's very reactive, the algorithm, because when I was doing the Anatomy of Dinosaurs book, I must have been doing just enough slowing down for dinosaur videos, because for a good 2-3 months there, I was getting dinosaur reels and dinosaur videos and dinosaur bones, and I didn't hate it. The 8-year-old in me was oh, this is delightful. But holy hell, has the algorithm learned that I like van life videos, because I'm getting them nonstop. Anyway, so Brad, I look forward to the van life trip that you and I will be taking together in a Dodge Sprinter. And I will say hello, everybody, and welcome to ComicLab, the show about making comics
and making a living from comics. I'm Brad Geiger, the author of the Webcomics Handbook and the creator of Evil Inc.
And I'm his pal Dave Kellett, cartoonist of Drive and Sheldon and co-director of the comic documentary Stripped.
And this week's hour of comics advice is made possible by your support at patreon.com/comiclab. So Dave, let's talk comics.
Let's talk comics, my friend. And a big thing to mention today, we have an incredible interview with David Betancourt of the Washington Post, who was, boy, I tell you what, we scheduled 15 minutes with him and ended up going for a delightful half an hour. And honestly, I could have done a whole hour with David. He was a delightful reporter from the Washington Post, covering pop culture, comics, and comic culture specifically. So keep an eye out for that. And a reminder that this show is going out live to our ComicLab Live Gab listeners over at patreon.com/comiclab. You could be watching the show live as we record it on Tuesday mornings with a live concurrent chat going. And if you happen to miss it for Life Lover Learning, it is recorded for your streaming pleasure later in the day over at patreon.com/comiclab. And Brad, who do we have sponsoring the show for us today?
Oh, today's show is being sponsored by our good friends over at DreamHost. If you go to dreamhost.com/comiclab, you'll see that they have set up a special hosting plan for people who are looking to own and control their own work by starting a website. My friends over at DreamHost, and I do say friends because we've had a 10-year relationship with all of my sites being hosted there. My friends have a special deal for you where you can get started hosting your own website at $2.59 a month, which is
Nelly.
Let's face it, most of us are reticent, a little bit scared of setting up our own website. At $2.59 a month, just to get your toe wet, to get things started, just to get the ball rolling, This is a fantastic price. And they've got everything that you could need there. I'm not going to go through all this stuff because honestly, it would take me a half hour just to do that. But you've got unlimited traffic, WordPress pre-installed. If you've got your site existing already, but it's on another site, like I've seen in the Discord, some people are saying, "Well, I've got my site set up on this and that," and I don't want to badmouth anybody else, but I always look at what they're using and go, "Oh God, you chose that." But if you've made kind of a not great choice, they've got an automated WordPress migration, right? Because you're like, I don't want to try to re-upload everything. No. DreamHost has that on lockdown for you. They just push a button and you can migrate everything over. And I'm telling you, everything you need, starting at $2.59 a month. And like we always say on this show, you need to own and control your own work. Having a website is your first step to really solidifying that. And DreamHost, a company that I've been with for over 10 years, is there for you waiting to make that happen.
And that's the biggest sort of tell here is that Brad has used and loved them himself for 10 years and long before any thought of a sponsorship. And I will say this, when it came time for Brad and his wife to renew their vows, I wasn't invited, but DreamHost was invited. No, so that's right. All you need to know. They're much closer and tied into Brad's friendship and love than I am. So do go check them out. And we thank DreamHost for sponsoring the show today. And Brad, what is our first topic for today, my friend?
Oh, this is great. I'm going to be fascinated to hear what you have to say about this. It's coming in from our friend Emily, who says, "Hi, Brad and Dave. I recently started posting my first webtoon and got some interesting advice from someone who just finished making their own series. She suggested making basic, pre-drawn versions of my characters in different poses that I could copy and paste into panels to help me save time. I've seen this advice from others as well, saying, quote, never draw the same thing twice, unquote, and showing a large sheet with the same character's face at different angles with all sorts of facial expressions already inked and ready to paste into a panel. I'm all for saving time, but this seems like a little bit much to me. I worry that if I start doing this, my artwork could start looking stiff, boring, and repetitive. But then again, there's a lot of dialogue in the panel. Would anybody even really notice? So that's my question to you, Dave. Copy and paste. It's an age-long question. Is it cheating? But this is even going more beyond that. This person has a whole page full of these characters, and they're using that to fill the panels. Thumbs up or thumbs down, or deserves further conversation?
Well, so I might surprise you on this one in that I say it deserves further conversation. Yeah. And I will be honest here in that the story of Drive, my science fiction comic strip, means a lot to me. I'm really enjoying telling that story. It's kind of like the great love creatively of my life right now is telling that story, aside from doing this podcast. And so I say that to couch what I'm about to say, which is I am very slow drawing Drive. I wish, even after 25 years of cartooning, I wish I was faster, but I think because unlike Sheldon, which is more gag a day, and disposable is not the right word, but you get where I'm going with this, is that it's not a one part of a much larger whole. It's just more of a standalone comic. Because Drive is going to be with me for another decade of creation and decades more afterward in terms of rereading, I spend a lot of time with it, and I'm not fast. And so I will admit that there are times where I will use existing art I'll flip it, I'll rework it, I'll redraw it 20%, but I'm not redoing the whole thing. Because if I have a character that takes me a long time to do all their hair, I'll just modify the face. I'll push in with the camera shot. I'll flip it. I'll angle them slightly differently. I do tricks like that so that I can focus more time on the spaceship, which is going to take me 5 hours to draw. And that's not a joke. There are times where I'm spending an ungodly amount of time on a space station or a spaceship or like a new setting. And so because I'm not fast, there is a part of me that has learned the art of the possible with comics because I have to get Drive out, but I also have to pick up the kids from school and I have to go make them dinner at some point, you know, and I have to take the dog out. I got to do all this other stuff. Like, not the dog takes forever, but you know what I'm saying here is that life has requirements that have to be done as well. And so for me, I have found a workaround, which is to take sometimes existing art, modify it, flip it, change it around, change the coloring, and in so doing, save myself an hour here, an hour there on a drive page that takes me 16 hours to do. Now, I know there immediately people are going to be going like, well, that's terrible, that's cheating. And yes, in a way it is. It's also the art of the possible. I'm trying to do the best I can with the time that I have in this life to make that story. And people are still mad at me that there's only one drive update a week, you know? So, but that being said, it is a fine line. And I have to be very careful to not have static or repetitive images. So you do have to modify. You do have to fool the eye is another way of saying it, that this is not something that they've seen before. How about you? Am I the only one that's going to admit that I've used copy paste?
Oh, no. I do too. But again, I think there's a nuance to the issue that we need to describe.
Yes.
I did a little bit more back in the day before I started using 3D models in Clip Studio. All right. When I started setting up my shots using a lot of 3D models and stuff like that, then it wasn't as easy for me to just cut and paste. But those 3D models saved me so much time. It kind of came out in the wash, right? Because I was not spending as much time double checking my proportions and double checking my anatomy and stuff like that. It was my way of doing the same thing.
Right.
I will say this: I'm not number one. I'm not above it. Absolutely. And if I've got something, especially from a couple pages earlier, that it's a very similar shot, I will immediately grab that and make a few changes on the way and reuse that. I don't have a single problem with that. But I don't use it quite as much for foreground. When I did use it, I had to be very careful when I was talking about flipping stuff, because inevitably, like if somebody's hair is parted on the right, all of a sudden
if there's an asymmetry, exactly.
So you have to be a little bit careful. My biggest concern about this is that you start to throttle back on your art a little bit so that you can make the copy paste work. In other words, all of a sudden, I could see that I was very, very tempted to all of a sudden keep all my characters very symmetrical. Right, their outfits were symmetrical. Their hair was parted right in the middle, you know, and it's like, no, that's not the best way to go for character design. I was making shortcuts.
It's like this, Brad. It's like your current scene in Evil Link is at a wedding, right? Two of the characters are getting married. Two of the superhero villains are getting married. But the only copy paste you have is that character from a previous scene where they're at the beach holding a taco and drinking a margarita, and you're like, well, they're in a bathing suit at the wedding. You're like, I can't change anything. Yeah, exactly. I'm saving myself time. So yes, I do take your point that it's something you have to be very careful about, because even, do you remember, I don't know if I talked to you about this, Brad, but 2 or 3 weeks ago, I had a drive update that, no joke, and I'm not kidding about this because we actually timed it. It was 60 hours of work to do this drive update, right? Do you remember this one that I'm talking about? The page that
yes, I do.
It came up beautiful. It was amazing. Yes. But I will admit this, because it was 60 hours of work, individual moments in that log update, there were copy paste moments that absolutely they were modified, but much like animation does it, where the animation designs a lot of characters like The Simpsons, a lot of shots will be done at 3/4 so that the mouth doesn't break the plane of the face, right? And they do that because then it could be a separate cell work where it's just the mouth moving, the background animation can stay the same. I often do that in comics as well, where the overall shape of a character might be modified, the arms, the hair, the tilting of the head, all that sort of stuff, but it's all reused, and then the face is redone. And sometimes that's enough with a different setting, different coloring, to make you think, all right, well, this is drawn wholesale completely new. And I admit, I wish that I was so fast that I would never need to do that. I'm not so fast. And so the art of the possible for me with Drive is to make that work in a way that fools everybody as much as possible.
Now, here's the dirty little secret. So we think, oh, this is something new because, Photoshop and Clip Studio, and we feel guilty about it as artists. But I want to read you a quote from Wally Wood, who was working in the 1960s and 70s, I believe. here's Wally Wood, and by the way, was an amazing artist. Never draw anything you can copy. Never copy anything you can trace, and never trace anything you can cut out and paste up. There was a guy who was dealing with a daily deadline. You know, he had to put out a certain number of pages every month to keep up with the comic book industry. And he was very plain about it. And no, I'm sorry, no apologies needed. If you can trace that and paste it, do it. Get on to the next page. There was no bones about it. And I'll tell you, for me, my personal, and I'll shout this from the rooftops, I will not redraw a background if you put a gun to my head. I hate backgrounds. I can't stand backgrounds. There's nothing interesting going on in the background. It's all in the foreground. It's the people. It's not the cup of coffee on the counter. That's pointless. I'll draw that background once and I'll reuse it 100 times, or I'll use Clip Studio to get my background set. And then I'll do, my word for it is auto trace. That goes back to, I think, Adobe Illustrator. But basically, I convert that into line art, and boom, I'm done. That background is done. Every now and again, I get somebody giving me a commission, and they'll say, hey, I want you to really have fun on that background. And I'm like, yeah, I'm going to have a lot of fun. Watch how much fun I have. Bink. Fun.
Yeah, and much like, you know, Wally Wood, arguably one of the best draftspeople ever in comics, had this same concern. The same is true for virtually the entire mangaka industry, who literally have files, books, and digital folders that you can buy wholesale. Like, here's a classroom, here's a supermarket, here's a park bench, here's an exterior of an airport, that literally just copy and paste into manga. And then also, in order to speed up the process of what is probably the world's most grueling publishing schedule, they also use speed lines all the time in manga. Like, instead of a background, how about a shit ton of speed lines? Instead of redrawing the scene, how about taking the previous scene, turning them all into silhouettes, and now it's a whole new panel, right? So what I'm saying is, artists the world over, in order to do the art of the possible, try to fool the reader into making them think that it's the new, and that's the key, is that it has to feel, look, and seem new, even though you're shaving off an hour or two from your process, because the question asker had a concern with, you don't want static images to be popping up in a way that makes the reader go, I've seen this before. This is feeling stale. This is feeling... And that's the kicker. But again, do I wish that this wasn't the case with me? Absolutely. But I'm not James Cameron. I don't have 400 people working on Avatar to make the sky people look perfect. It's just me doing the line art, and I got to do the best I can while at the same time raising a family and doing all that other stuff. So it literally is the art of the possible.
It's all about balance, right? It's all about using this to the extent that you can without it making a negative impact on your work, which is a balance issue. And the whole reason you're doing that balance is that so you can have work-life balance, so that you're not chained to your drawing desk or to your Wacom Cintiq and not living your life. That's balance too. It's all about balance and finding that balance. Don't let yourself feel guilty that you're doing stuff to find balance in your life. That life is too short to live in an imbalanced life.
And let me tell you, as someone who's at year 25, and Brad's pretty much at year 25 too, I will tell you that burnout is a very real thing that we have seen again and again and again by the people that were too precious, where every line had to be a perfect stroke, every bit of coloring, every texture every panel had to be perfectly constructed. Well, I can tell you, I could literally give you 40 names right now of people that are no longer cartooning because they kind of gave themselves a case of burnout, or they just had a breakdown of like, I can't keep up this pace, or I can't keep doing it. So many titles, so many artists. So comics really it can be a brutal thing to do for decades on end. And so it really is the art of the possible.
Absolutely. So, Dave, we've got a couple of updates for our listeners here for things that we've talked about earlier in previous episodes. The first one, I'm just going to do it real quick. The D&D kerfluffle. D&D is now switching, from what I'm reading, to a Creative Commons license, which is really, it sounds like a pretty nice solution. It's a graceful solution for them. Creative Commons came up on our purview a long time ago, and A lot of the stuff that I saw there didn't really fit for me, but this is one of those things that really Creative Commons was created for. So it looks like a very interesting application of that. So I'm going to be very interested to see how that plays out. But just in case you heard us talking about it earlier, wanted to know how it turned out, that's what's going on there. And secondly, this one I'm very excited about, an update on artificial intelligence, specifically AI art. Getty Images is suing the AI art tool Stable Diffusion. All right, because evidently they found out that Stable Diffusion was using Getty Images photos that they had, I guess, allegedly scraped from the Getty Images website. I'm not sure how that exactly works, but that's what the allegation is. The interesting thing here is that Getty Images has deep pockets and a long, long history of litigating copyright infringement. This is going to be one to watch.
Absolutely. And like Brad said, the key thing here is that there are few organizations that have as much frickin' money as the Getty organization. I mean, listen, I know that Getty Images is separate from the Getty Foundation, but let me just tell you a little bit about what you can do with Getty's oil money when you set up a foundation. They have so much money that for tax reasons, as a foundation, they have to spend an ungodly amount of money every year. They have to spend it. They can't hold on to it. It can't sit in a bank account. As a foundation, it has to be spent. Now, I know that Getty Images is a separate thing from the Getty Foundation, but all of this is to say there is an ungodly amount of money behind the Getty organizations writ large, and that this one, like Brad said, will be one to watch because unlike the class action suit that we mentioned, I think last week, this one just has deep pockets that have no interest other than winning in a case like this, because it is their core business for Getty Images. And again, I will say, like I said last week, I'm not entirely sure that Getty Images will win this, because there is an argument still that this is a fair use, public use of Getty's images, which were publicly displayed, right? There is an argument for that. But go ahead, Brad. You want to jump in? This is important.
Okay, so Getty Images has a website that you buy their images, and they've got a catalog so you can see what you're buying, right? Right. If they scraped those images, and I'm not intimately aware of the allegation, but if they scraped those images, they took what was supposed to be for sale and they acquisitioned it for their own use, that goes beyond copyright infringement. That goes into theft. And that's what's being allocated here. And so the interesting thing is we'll see how hot these AI art tools are when all of a sudden they've got to pay for the thing that they're using to make their tool work. Let's see what happens to that. And Getty is the one that can make that happen.
Well, let me ask you this. Do we know in the allegation that Getty has put forth so far, is the allegation that they scraped the publicly available versions or that they scraped through a paid account the privately held high-res versions?
I don't know off the top of my head. I do not know.
Okay, but regardless, this is a new and interesting wrinkle because you're right that Getty has a whole paid access thing that say webcomics do not have. And boy, as we talked about in terms of our 2023 predictions, this is exactly what we want. Let them fight. Let the billionaires fight it out. Because literally, this is the billions of Microsoft supporting OpenAI fighting the billions of Getty Images. And this is what we want. This will establish case law on how AI art can proceed, basically, going forward. So, like I said, this is not to our benefit. This is to Getty Images' benefit, but sometimes the crumbs benefit the little people. So because I don't have the money or wherewithal to sue them, we'll let Getty Images do it and hope some of those crumbs fall our way.
Hey, Dave, guess what? It's time for our interview with David Betancourt.
Hey, if you're listening while you work, take a minute to stand and stretch.
And while you're doing that, we're going to tell you why you should join us on Patreon.
When you do, you're going to get hours and hours of podcasts that we've recorded just for backers.
And exclusive Patreon posts that go even deeper on ComicLab topics.
And access to our exclusive Discord server, which is a thriving community of professional cartoonists.
So you can support the show you love and get tons of actionable resources for your own cartooning.
And listen, if you can't swing a pledge this month, we get it. No worries.
Yeah, listen, you can still support the show by rating us wherever you get your podcasts.
Just leave a 5-star review and a few kind words.
That, along with mentions on social media, is incredibly helpful.
Now, everybody, let's talk comics. Well, Brad, I'm super excited. We're super excited to welcome David Betancourt today, joining us from the Washington Post. He is a reporter focusing on comic book culture, and we wanted to have him on because it's a really fascinating and wonderful, first of all, wonderful job to have in this world. It's a uniquely rare and wonderful job. But also, it's fun to be able to talk to you, David, and welcome you today to talk about comics from sort of 30,000 feet up and what you're seeing that maybe we in the trenches don't see in terms of trends, bigger pictures, how comics are translating to film into comics, and that sort of thing. So first of all, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So let's get started for folks that might not imagine what a reporter working on comic book culture might entail. If it's Thanksgiving dinner and you're sitting talking to a cousin that you haven't seen in 5 or 10 years, how do you describe your job?
The best way to describe it is, I think anyone who's been following the pulse of Hollywood over the last 20 years has seen that comic book culture, especially superhero movies, have gone from something that's niche to something that's really taken over the industry and become a real power in Hollywood. You know, I'd say Kevin Feige, the president of Marvel Studios, one of the most powerful men in Hollywood right now, and rightfully so, when you look at the numbers that those movies pull in. But what it's done is it's kind of changed the conversation from where things like an Avengers movie or a Batman movie might just be for a certain crowd, and it's become very mainstream now. So what we've been doing at the Washington Post, I've been here 15 years. I've been in the style section in the last 7. We've kind of covered that Big Bang moment. It used to be a lot more concentrated on the entirety of the culture. We used to have a blog here called the Comic Riffs blog with my colleague, Michael Kavanaugh. It lasted from 2008 to 2018. So we had a great 10-year run. And we really tackled everything. I mean, we obviously covered the movies as they grew, streaming, animation. But we also, because, it's almost getting to that point, but the calendar hasn't gotten to the point where there's something every month, but we're almost there.
Yeah.
It really kind of is if you throw in streaming and everything else. But what I used to do as a reporter is I filtered it between, okay, you've got your calendar. We know when the superhero movies are coming out. When there isn't a movie to cover, I'm going to focus on comic books. And we did that for 10 years. Speaking to the writers and the artists and the editors that make comic books happen. Because as you guys know, without the comic books, we're not in this era that we have right now of superheroes.
Right.
We don't do that anymore as much. Over the last few years, we've kind of, and not by my choice, taken a more direct approach with the cinematic and streaming aspects of this, just because it's become so huge that it merits the attention. There could be arguments that, the comic book reading audience isn't as big as the comic book viewing audience. I don't buy that for a second. But over the few years, like if you go to my author page at WashingtonPost.com, click on my picture, look at all the articles I've written, you're going to see a lot of superhero movies. You're going to see a lot of Andor, Mandalorian, things like that. You might have to scroll down a little further when you see me actually writing about a comic book. That's been a change that we've made over the last couple of years. So I guess to come back to your question at the Thanksgiving table, I'll just tell my cousin that Kevin Feige and James Gunn are keeping me hella busy.
Well, David, this actually brings up a topic that Dave and I were talking about before we started recording, because we were saying, the MCU kind of ushered this whole era in. Oh, but it was over 10 years ago, right? It was a long time that
2008.
Yeah. And it's ushered in, like you just said, we're in a zone now where if you count streaming services, there's something new coming out that's superhero related every month, right? If you count like She-Hulk and all this other stuff. My question to you is, do you see it coming to an end anytime soon? Like my thought is always everything's got a beginning, middle, and an end. Do you see this coming to an end? And if so, what do you think is going to cause this to start to shrink after it's been such a dominant force for so many years?
Well, hopefully it doesn't end till my last kid's out of college. That's my...
Like, I need a few more of these, few more years.
I hear that.
Come on, Kevin, just give me a couple more decades here.
We can do that MODOK standalone for a couple more seasons. We just got to milk this. Yeah.
This question comes up a lot. I was actually in a meeting the other day where someone brought up superhero fatigue.
Yeah.
And I instantly shouted back, there's no such thing.
Yeah.
It's really the only fatigue for this stuff is coming from the predominantly mainstream press and the critics that just aren't into this stuff at all. They don't speak the language.
Right.
It's not running through their veins. Back at Comic Riffs, we used to have, we would have our main critics who are award-winning and spectacular, such as Ann Hornaday, write their reviews. And then on Comic Riffs, I would write my review, specifically letting our readers know that it was a review from the perspective of someone who's knee-deep in the comics and really into this stuff. So you always had that kind of variety. I don't think this is going anywhere anytime soon. It's very interesting. Marvel Studios is going through, I think for the first time, this moment where people are like, oh, well, that last phase didn't, make me want to have 4 kids and name them all Kevin. That's not really their fault. You can't have a big bad every time. But no, I don't. One, this goes back way before the MCU. I teach a class on this at the University of Maryland on comic book culture. And what we focus on is like this 20-year box, basically starting with the first X-Men film and, way back Hugh Jackman's first X-Men film. That was the year 2000. That was the big bang of where we are now.
Yeah. That's
when Hollywood figured out, man, people are hungry for this and we can make money off of it. That's what got the cogs moving a little bit. And even before that, there were always moments of pop culture, from Christopher Reeve as Superman. The reason I'm standing here talking to you guys right now is because Michael Keaton was Batman in 1989.
Yeah.
My dad took me to see that as a 9-year-old, and it blew my mind.
Right.
That's are horror movies going away? No.
Right.
Are mysteries going away? Drama's not going away. Romance isn't going away. I think what has to happen first is people just have to accept that this is a genre that is clamped on the Hollywood and isn't going anywhere. Are there people that want it to go somewhere? Yes. Are there people that are sick of it? Absolutely. I work with tons of them, let me tell you. But I don't see it happening anytime soon.
Yeah. And then for you, as you survey the streaming services, the movies coming out, what do you, and then in general in the comic book world that I'm sure you as a fellow nerd still love and follow, what is it the big trends that maybe we don't see coming that maybe you have an idea of what might be coming in the year ahead, in the next 3 years, next 5 years, for where the world of comic books and superheroes is going?
I think streaming definitely has a place, and the reason it feels like a little something extra is because it's really hard to, there's a reason those big moment Avengers movies are 3 hours long, because you've only got 3 hours to tell a story you've been building towards for years. Whereas when you go to streaming, not only do you have more time to break it down chapter per chapter and make it serialized, you can also work with characters that don't have to be world crushers. I think one of the things we're going to see in streaming in the future is you're going to see a lot more, especially as James Gunn takes the helm at DC. Yeah. Not every character has to be a household name. It doesn't have to be, we're way past the point with Marvel. We're at the third Groot movie now. We're at the third Ant-Man movie now. Right. We're past the point where we've used the characters that everyone knows. I think streaming provides an opportunity to dig a little deeper into that library, use characters that probably aren't strong enough to hold their own franchise cinematically, but use it in a serialized way, tell a good story, and go from there.
Yeah. Specifically, when you say James Gunn, what he did with the Peacemaker series,
Exactly.
it blew my doors off.
How many Peacemaker comics did you read as a kid?
I
Zero.
know.
Zero.
Wow. I know.
And between the three of us, I'm sure we've read tens of thousands of comics.
Yes.
Easily.
Yeah.
Easily.
Never came across Peacemaker. And now, household name.
Yeah.
That's what I think streaming brings to it. Moments like that. And especially, we already know James proved it with Guardians of the Galaxy. I didn't start reading Guardians of the Galaxy till the movies came out and Brian Michael Bendis started writing those comics.
Yeah.
Even though they'd been around for a while. But that's these vaults, these libraries that both Warner's and Disney have with Marvel. It's like we've only scratched the surface of what's there. And, we're going to see a lot more characters that the three of us have probably never read. And we'll probably watch their shows.
Right. Well, let me ask you this. One thing that Brad and I often talk about, and it's not without concern, in light of like the Warner Brothers merger and how that impacts, the broader DC cinematic universe. But there's also the fact that they now have, depending on how you want to quantify it, 70 years of IP that they can tap into, like you were just saying with Peacemaker. But at what point does that merger make it really unnecessary to maintain DC Comics in print anymore, as we have come to know it, where they just say, we'll keep doing Batman occasionally as, quarterlies or something, but we've got the IP, we own it. The money making is in the movies and the streaming. We're going to let the DC print universe die.
I've heard this before, and it's a valid point. Obviously, when you look at if you're an accountant and you're looking at the money that comics are bringing in,
right,
and you're looking at the money movies are bringing in, clearly they're two different leagues of finances. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that comic books are bought by people that are really in the comic books. A superhero movie is something that all the fans are going to see, but all the people that aren't fans are going to see too. It's a different neighborhood. I do not see a future where both Warner's and Disney / Marvel say, we're just going to do the live action stuff and we're not going to do the publishing, because the publishing is what fuels these stories.
Yeah.
Now, yes, you do have people like James Gunn is writing a Superman movie right now. We all know that.
Yeah.
And it's probably going to be something from his brain, something new, something fresh. That works every now and then. But for the most part, I mean, if you look at the success of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, they are being very faithful and loyal to their publishing.
Mm-hmm.
They've taken their own, the Infinity Gauntlet, Kang coming in with time travel and all that stuff, the Avengers forming. I do not think, is it something that big time execs are probably thinking about? Yes, because, the financial factors are different. But to me, when I look at what Marvel has done, all the strength of Marvel's last decade, the success of Marvel Studios and what Kevin Feige and all of them have achieved has been because they were loyal to that library. DC, not so much. I mean, the biggest thing DC's probably done in the last decade was Christopher Nolan's trilogy. While that had some remnants of the comics, that was very much Nolan and his brother's story that they were telling, that they came up with. But you need that library, you need those ideas. And quite honestly, look, there's a reason Hollywood is sequel happy and remake happy. It's because coming up with a good idea is not easy.
Yeah.
If it were easy, everyone would do it. And when you have almost a century of storytelling that has such a loyal following, it's not going to hurt to every now and then base something you make off of something from those pages.
Absolutely.
Right. Well, let me ask you this, as both a journalist and as an educator, on some levels, have you had sort of a whiplash over the course of your life where all three of us went from being sort of the geeky outsider in terms of what we read and what our interests were, to now it is responsible for billions and billions of income and thousands of jobs around the world? And as a journalist, you see that on a day-to-day basis of just how much this matters to the economy. But is there sort of a personal whiplash for you? Like, the kid that was sort of I'm sure all three of us were a little bit on the geekier side, a little bit on the more, niche readers in some respects. But now we are this part of this larger cultural juggernaut. How has that journey been for you as a journalist and an educator?
I remember, for me, the moment I realized we, and I mean the three of us, had finally arrived. For me, it was 2012. It was the Avengers movie. It was a $200 million opening weekend.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is it. This is everything changes here. This is because, you know, I'll be 43 this year. I was born in 1980. My parents were very young when they had me. They were 16 when they had me. So my dad, as he liked to joke, you know, we grew up together. My dad was an avid Marvel Comics reader. So I remember sitting down, you know, reading Punisher comics with him because that was his favorite character. Probably not the best comic to introduce your son to. But, you know, he's only 16 years older than me. What are you going to do? But I distinctly remember in the early 90s, remember that X-Men wave with Jim Lee and Chris Claremont in the early 90s? I remember sitting that was an era where I couldn't wait to go to the mall and pick up an issue of Wizard magazine. Remember Wizard magazine?
Yeah.
Wizard magazine was our Bible. And remember they used to have that section where they would do a casting?
Yes.
And they would say, oh, we think Arnold Schwarzenegger should be Colossus and Vanessa Williams, the former beauty queen, should be Storm.
Right.
And I just eat that stuff up because that was the only place I could get it.
Yeah.
Even as an 11 and 12-year-old, I knew that I would just say, why aren't they making these movies? I would see an X-Men movie, you know, back in 1991, 20 times in theaters by myself. Why isn't it happening? So we've all lived through, and I think part of the reason that's fueling the financial boom of this is all of us who grew up without it for our entire lives, our childhoods, our teen years, and up to when we were in college. You know, the Spider-Man movie didn't come out until 2002, my senior year of college.
Yeah.
We spent literally the first almost quarter century of our lives without this stuff.
Yeah.
And I think those of us that grew up like that, A, are so happy that it's here. And B, we've all got jobs and money to spend. We can go out and indulge in it.
Yes.
You know, it's not like we're waiting for our allowance money or anything. You know, that's a huge part of it. Another huge part, as I'm sure you guys know with your connections to Hollywood, is it took a few geeks to get into the circle over there to say, hey, you need to trust me here. This is some cool stuff. Let's see what we can do.
Right.
But yeah, no, to be from that era, we grew up without this stuff. I'm still the Big Bang. As I teach in my class, the Big Bang started in the year 2000. We're now in the year 2023.
Yeah.
23 years later, almost a quarter century later, I am still in shock that we're here, but happy as hell that we're here, and not at all surprised that it's taken off like this. I'm also happy that, you know, it's probably best that it took a little time, you know, special effects and graphics and all that stuff, you know, because let's face it, if they tried to do Infinity War back in, you know, 1995, it might have looked like, you know,
would have been a much different movie.
Remember Captain America with the rubber ears and all that.
Well, I mean, I've got you by about 10 years. I remember as a kid wishing that I could find a Batman logo T-shirt. Just can you imagine? And Eddie,
now there's a website you can go to.
It's just amazing. So
hey, let me tell you, I normally don't dress like this. Like my chic here at the Post is jeans, a blazer, and I normally have, like yesterday I was wearing a Miles Morales T-shirt underneath my blazer. Everyone here knows me and knows that's my thing. And a huge part of that is because, as you said, that stuff wasn't around. I used to always see the ads in an X-Men comic where, like, Marvel was selling T-shirts that I would beg my parents to, you know, cut out the coupon and get it for me because, you know, you couldn't find that stuff in the stores. It's so mainstream now that, you know, our kids don't have that problem.
No, it would be harder to not find that stuff now, to go in a store and avoid it. So here's my question for you. Looking ahead to like the 2023, who's the biggest under the radar creator that's just about to break through? Like who should we be looking at right now that is doing amazing work, but just isn't getting enough attention right now, in your opinion?
Now, are we speaking live action entertainment, comics? What are we talking?
Whichever you prefer, tell you the truth. Although I'm thinking more comics, but if you've got a live action answer that works just as well, that's good too.
I'm very interested in what DC has going on with the revitalization of Milestone Comics. Yeah. Milestone, as you guys remember, with Dwayne McDuffie and Dennis Cowan and all those guys back in the 90s, was, especially for me, someone that's half African American, such a big deal. I mean, Marvel has the coolest Black superhero of all time. There's no argument. It's Black Panther. It's always going to be Black Panther, and the next person will always be number 2. But DC has an entire Black superhero universe that's legit, that's already been through, incarnations and all that, and they're back. I personally, like, if I'm James Gunn, I'm like, calling somebody at the Warner Vault, and I'd get like 5 sacks with $ on them and just hand them to Ryan Coogler and say, here's Milestone. Let me see what you can do.
Yeah. It's true. I mean, and that's been, we're jumping back to over the course of our lives. That's been one of the things that's been cool to see what comics has done I think comics, more than most genres, have done an amazing job of sort of expanding the tent for everybody in terms of sights and sounds and people and types. And it's been a wonderful thing, I think, over the course of our lives to see that it's been comics that did it, not just movie making. Comics specifically has been driving it, where now I think of people watching, and I don't know what he's popping into my mind, but Jonathan Majors, I think, I get shivers when I see him do Kang. And that is going to be awesome for people to see him over the next 5-10 years. I think he's one of the most amazing actors going. And that's going to be fantastic.
Huge gift for him.
Yeah. And so, but anyway, what are your thoughts about that, about how comics expand the tent or have been more welcoming than most genres of entertainment? At least I think. But maybe I'm falsely projecting that into the world.
No, comics have always tried, even in the earliest days of Stan and Jack and the bullpen, to be inclusive. Those Marvel comics of the 60s and 70s were all about reflecting, more so than DC back then, but reflecting the world outside of your window. Probably the most impactful comic book creation of all time for me is something that just happened over the last decade, and that was the creation of Miles Morales by Brian Michael Bendis and Sarah Pichelli. Those, I never in my life, I'll never forget my colleague Michael Kavner called me. He sent me a link to the USA Today story where they announced it. And they say, yes, Spider-Man's going to be half Latino, half African-American. And I was almost shaking. Yeah. It was like this is an April Fool's joke. Are there cameras here? Is Ashton Kutcher going to pop out somewhere and be like, gotcha? What's going on here? So, but it's been great to watch the evolution of it. And obviously, Miles is a character that means a lot to me. I actually wrote my first Miles Morales comic for Marvel last year for Marvel Voices, an anthology they did with Latino
fantastic
artists and writers. And that was a lot of fun. I've got some more Miles stuff on the way, hopefully soon, that I can't talk about, but hopefully will be out in the wild sooner rather than later. But as a reporter, and social media plays a big impact in this too, because when Miles came out, and I remember Brian Michael Bendis telling me this, and this is where diversity in media matters, because all of the stories kept saying Latino and Black, which doesn't tell the whole story, because Latinos can be Black too, as you know, blah, blah, blah.
Yep.
But I could tell there were no Latino reporters reporting on the story, because no story said what type of Latino Miles was. So when I got a hold of Brian Michael Bendis, one of my first big interviews, I said, look, Brian, I got to know, because I'm like, is he Puerto Rican? Is he Cuban? Is he Dominican? What is it? And he's like, oh, yeah. Miles's mother is Puerto Rican. They're based off of a couple I knew that we're still friends with back in the day, yada, yada, yada. And then boom, I put that in the story. And that's when it kind of got out there what he was. So when that moment first happened, it was very much this is 2010, round of applause, good for Marvel.
Yeah.
Axel Alonso, I think, was the editor at the time. And, only Brian Michael Bendis and his star power in the comic book industry could take a chance like that. Because one thing he told me back then, remember Ultimate Comics Spider-Man, probably the best run of Spider-Man comics ever written by Brian Michael Bendis and Mark Bagley. Bendis told me that back then, when those Spider-Man comics came out in 2002, 2001, he's like, back then is when we should have made him a biracial kid. But, it didn't happen for a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
So because I wrote, you can Google it. When they killed the Ultimate Peter Parker, I was furious because I spent over 100 issues reading this fantastic teenage Spider-Man. And I was like, I don't care who this new kid is. I'm not going to like him. I remember they showed they showed an image of the new suit, the black and red suit.
Yeah.
And they say, here's a new Spider-Man coming soon. Peter's dead. Here's a new guy. And I just knew in my head, I was like, he's going to look like Captain America. He's going to be blonde hair, blue eyed. And that's how they're going to make him look different from Peter.
Right.
And not excited at all. Wrote a column, one of my first comics columns saying, this is one of the great Marvel characters, blah, blah, blah. And then surprise, I was under the mask. So, totally changed my perspective, and I changed my tune very quickly. But back then, around 2010, it was a big deal that Brian did that. When you get to around 2015, when Riri Williams was created about 5 years later, same co-creator, Brian Michael Bendis, all of a sudden the combo changed to, yeah, this is cool, but can't we get some creators of color behind these new characters? Like, can't we get a female black writer and an artist of color? And that's where social media got into the fold a little bit.
Right.
Because all of a sudden, I really think social media was one of the things that helped Marvel and DC realize how diverse the fan base was. It wasn't just that standard 40-something comic book reader that we all assume is flipping through the pages. And that really had an impact, because now you see, with Marvel and DC with Milestone, Marvel with, especially with their Voices anthology they've been doing a lot lately, it's not just that we're bringing more inclusive characters to your comic book panels, but the person that's writing it, the person that's drawing it, is also someone like you as well. And that shift between when Miles was created and when Riri came along was very interesting to watch.
Yeah. Like my wife always says whenever she does TV meetings, no stories about us without us, which I always think is a fun way to say it. But and so it's funny you should mention the specificity too about Miles being Puerto Rican, because I remember specifically people in my life who didn't really care about comics, Puerto Ricans in my life, that you mentioned he's Puerto Rican, all of a sudden all the Boricuas are like, I'm sorry, what? Oh, now I'm interested again? Wait, hello, I'm back in the room. I'm sorry, what was that now?
Changes everything.
Yeah. And so it was great. It actually brought in a lot of people. I was surprised in my sort of extended sphere. They're like, you know what, I might pick up an issue of Spider-Man now. This was cool.
When you read the comics, when you play the game, even the video game, there are Puerto Rican flags everywhere. I mean, it's a big deal. There are people that aren't into this. There are people that want their comics just the way they were 50 years ago. And there's a part of me that understands that. But if there's anything I can say is, I'm living proof that decisions like that matter. It had a huge impact on me. It was one of the things that kept me reading comics in 2010 when I was 30 years old and trying to figure out what to do with my career, because there was a Spider-Man that was just like me. So
Right. Well, okay, so let's wrap it up with one fun final question. It's Wednesday. It's New Comic Book Day. What title you got $6 burning in your pocket? What title do you absolutely have to pick up if you're walking by a comic book shop?
Ironically, I love the new Miles Morales series that just started. Saladin Ahmed just finished his I think it was a 42 issue run on Miles. Now Cody Ziegler, who I believe was in the She-Hulk writers room, I have to double check, is doing it. The art is absolutely fantastic. And it's only 2 issues in. The second issue just came out last week. That's what I'm reading right now. Yeah. Shocker.
Oh, that's a fantastic pick. That's a fantastic pick. Well, David, thank you so much for joining us today. And for everyone listening, I'm just going to spell it out. David's last name, Betancourt. Check out his work at the Washington Post. And thank you for your work. Thank you for joining us today. It has been fantastic talking to you.
Thanks for having me, guys. Appreciate it.
That was fantastic. Thanks, David. Oh, what a fantastic interview. And on that note, you've been listening to ComicLab, the show about making comics and making a living from comics.
Your hosts have been my ever-delightful friend, Brad Geiger, the editor of webcomics.com and the creator of Evil Inc. at evil-comic.com.
And my good friend, Dave Kellett, the co-director of the comics documentary Stripped and the cartoonist of Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com and Drive at drivecomic.com.
And the ComicLab theme song is used with permission from Andy Creighton at theworldrecord.net. And this episode was edited by the ever-wonderful Matt Woodard of Woodsong Productions over at www.woodsong.media.
If you love ComicLab, you can rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts as well as Spotify, and you may hear your review featured on a future episode. Dave, this comes in from somebody who just joined our community, Andrew, who says this: hey, I'm a longtime listener from the Web Comics Weekly days and only realized ComicLab existed a few months ago, and I'm slowly going back through the archives. I'm pleased to give something back to you and Brad for the years of joy, laughter, and wisdom you both have given me. Also, I'm so glad. I guess this person must have received, Dave, one of your personal Bonjoro video responses. I'm so glad to receive your personalized video, as it confirms, having only seen your headshots and hearing your voices for years, that I thought Brad had your voice and you had his.
By the way, Brad, this is not the first time that this has happened, where people meet us in real life and go, oh, God, I had the wrong voice to the wrong face.
I was expecting your voice to come out of his head and vice versa. How does it feel, Dave, knowing that there's a certain amount of people that have for a long time assumed that you were the asshole?
Well, I will say this just as a public reminder to everyone. So if you're trying to match up faces online to the voices, Brad is the one that's the total smoke show, and I'm the one that looks like the 40,000-year-old caveman that got hit by a rock. So that's the differentiator if you're trying to match up faces.
True. That's not true at all. It looks like you got hit by a club. But listen, actually, now let's see. How can we do this? Okay, I've got facial hair that's turning more and more gray every passing month.
Listen, I used to have a beard forever. I stopped growing my beard out because I have like a Santa beard now all of a sudden. Yeah. It's pure white, and it made me sad. I was like, well, I don't want this beard anymore. So I'm the clean shaven one that used to have a lovely beard, but now is clean shaven. Brad has what's called a Van Dyke a mustache and goatee, which is the kind of facial hair you want to have when you no longer want to be sexually attractive to anyone.
Right.
So
right. That's right. It was causing problems. That's the way I keep everybody at a safe distance, and then I can go on, because I was getting accosted in the street. You know.
Exactly. It was getting too much. Like, you have to be able to walk down a public street, Brad, and so that was a big help for it. No, but anyway, so we're both about the same height. We're both kind of interchangeably boring-looking white dudes. I mean, there's really no distinguishing feature. We both have glasses. We both have an extra 25 on us.
Easily.
We're both graying. I don't know how to distinguish us for the facial folks that haven't met us.
Facially, other than, like, I'd say, no, you keep your hair a lot shorter than I do. I've got a little bit more body and wave to my hair. A little bit more, you know.
You've got a Clark Kent thing going. Oh, you know what? I always wear a baseball cap. That's a good one.
Yeah, I rarely do.
I always wear a baseball cap. Brad can bench press 300. I could bench press 80 if I'm lucky. That's probably another difference.
Yes.
Yes.
You're talking ounces, right?
No, but I would love to hear from more people who had the faces wrong when they first met us and went, oh God, that's a wrong voice coming from that face, because it's happened more than once on many occasions. And on that note, I will say ComicLab is made possible by your support at patreon.com/ComicLab. So I will go ahead and say that twice, patreon.com/Brad is the one that's the smoke show. I can give everybody another one that helps distinguish Brad from Dave.
Yeah.
We both love T-shirts. Brad wears a V. I never have been able to wear a V. I can't pull them off.
You never wore a V-neck T-shirt?
No, but have you ever gone deep V, like a guy that's going to a club, like a little something for a little?
You need way more chest hair than I've got to wear a deep V. This is like a baby's bottom. There's nothing going on down there. I can't wear a deep V. This is the most V I can wear.
You know, Brad doesn't have a lot of chest hair when he's named them. That's when there's not a lot.
Don't be so mean to Barry.